Hello again, this is Mr. Bowlby. We are in CKLA Domain 1, The Wind in the Willows, for 3rd grade. The lesson 5, beginning now, is entitled Mr. Badger. Themes. Who remembers what a theme is? Alrighty, themes are a literary tool. They're a broad idea that comes up many times over the course of a story. What themes have we heard thus far in The Wind in the Willows? Think about that. We've heard of several, and we do have a themes chart going, and we're trying to keep up with. Friendship and loyalty, responsibility, irresponsibility, and today we're going to learn about a new one, hospitality. So my question is now, what is hospitality? And someone mentioned they heard the word hospital in that. It's actually very, very much true, because hospitality is about treating guests well, being warm and welcoming and friendly toward them, taking care of their needs, much like a hospital takes care of the physical needs of their patients. They also attempt to take care of all the other needs they can as well. A hospitable person is someone who is attentive to their guests' or friends' needs. So think about some examples of hospitality that we've heard so far. Here's a couple options to write down. Rat shares his boat and picnic lunch with Mole. We heard that right off at the beginning of the story. Rat inviting Mole into his home to spend the night after the rowing incident. Makes a nice fire. They have a cheerful meal. Rat makes Mole feel right at home. And Mole ends up staying there for quite some time. Toad also displays hospitality by inviting Rat and Mole into his caravan and sharing his food and beds with them. Even though one could argue Toad was being a little bit selfish because he wanted Rat and Mole to do all the work while they were on the open road, but that's beside the point. He was still showing hospitality. Describe what you see in this image. This draws us back to the end of the last lesson, where we can see them knocking on Mr. Badger's door. Here's some vocabulary for you to pause and consider before we jump into the story. Atmosphere, conducted, retired, summoned, thoroughly. All important words before we get into the story for you to kind of know ahead of time what's coming. Here's our countryside. We are in the middle of the wild wood, where you can see Badger's house down there on the far right. Rat and Mole waited patiently for what seemed a very long time. At last there was a noise of a bolt sliding back, and the door opened a few inches. "Who is it?" said a rather gruff voice. "Oh, Badger," cried the rat. "It's me, Rat, and my friend Mole. We've lost our way in the snow." "What, Ratty, my dear little man," explained the Badger. "Come along in, both of you." The two animals tumbled over each other in their eagerness to get inside. Badger, who wore a long dressing gown, carried a flat candlestick in his paw. "This is not the sort of night for small animals to be out," he said paternally. "But come into the kitchen. There's a fire there, and supper too." The word paternally, I just wanted to mention real quick, refers to what? Parental, kind of like a paternal referring to fatherly. So he's being fatherly when he talks to them about how he wants them to come in out of the cold. A picture of the kind of candle that Badger would have been carrying. Okay. He shuffled on in front of them and they followed him down a long, gloomy passage into the central hall. Once there, they could dimly see the other long tunnel-like passages branching off in various directions. But there were doors in the hall as well. One of these the Badger flung open, and at once they found themselves in a large fire-lit kitchen. The floor was well-worn red brick, and on the wide hearth burnt a fire of logs. A couple of high-backed settles were facing each other, on either side of the fire. In the middle of the room there stood a long table with benches on either side. The kindly Badger guided them into one of the settles, and bade them remove their wet coats and boots. Then he fetched them dressing gowns and slippers, He bathed the mole's shin with warm water and dressed the cut. When they were thoroughly warm, the badger summoned them to the table to eat a delicious meal. As they dined, the badger sat in his armchair at the head of the table and listened as the animals told their story. When supper was finished, the badger said heartily, "Now then, tell us the news from your part of the world. How is old Toad going on?" "Oh, from bad to worse," said the rat gravely. "Another smash-up?" "How many has he had?" inquired the badger gloomily. "Smashes or machines?" asked the rat. "Oh well, after all, it's the same thing with Toad. This is the 7th. "He's been in the hospital 3 times, put in the mole. "And as for the fines he's had to pay, simply awful to think of." "Yes, and that's part of the trouble," continued the rat. "Toad's rich, we all know, but he's not a millionaire. He'll either be killed or ruined." "Badger, we're his friends. Aren't we to do something?" The badger thought for a while. "Now look here," he said at last. "Of course you know I can't do anything now." His 2 friends agreed, quite understanding his point. No animal, according to the rules of animal etiquette, is ever expected to do anything heroic during the off-season of winter. "Very well, then," continued the badger, "but when once the year has really turned, if not before, you know." Both animals nodded gravely. They knew. "Well then," went on the badger, "then we'll bring Toad back to reason. Well, you're asleep, rat." "Not me," said the rat, waking up. "He's been asleep 2 or 3 times since supper," said the mole, laughing. He himself was feeling quite lively. Badger's house suited him and made him feel at home, whereas the rat, who slept every night in a bedroom beside a river, naturally felt the atmosphere quite oppressive. "Well, it's time we're all in bed," said Badger, getting up and fetching flat candlesticks. "Come along, you 2, and I'll show you to your quarters. Take your time tomorrow morning. Breakfast at any hour you please." He conducted the 2 animals to a long room with 2 little white beds in it. Moments later, the 2 white beds contained 1 mole and 1 rat. The 2 tired animals came down to breakfast very late the next morning. When they did emerge, they found a bright fire burning in the kitchen, 2 young hedgehogs sitting on the bench at the table eating oatmeal. "Where have you 2 youngsters come from?" said the rat pleasantly. "Lost your way in the snow?" "Yes, sir," said the elder of the 2 hedgehogs. "Me and little Billy here, we was trying to find our way to school. We lost ourselves. At last we found Mr. Badger's back door." That is an adorable badger. Hedgehog, sorry. That's an adorable hedgehog. There you go. So cute little nose. Beady little black eyes. "I understand," said the rat, cutting himself some rashers from the side of bacon, while the mole dropped some eggs into a saucepan. "What's the weather like outside?" "Oh, terrible bad, sir," said the hedgehog. "Where's Mr. Badger?" inquired the mole. "The master's gone to his study, sir," replied the hedgehog, "and he said as to how he was not going to be particularly busy. He was going to be particularly busy this morning, and on no account was he to be disturbed." This explanation, of course, was thoroughly understood. The animals well knew the badger, having eaten a hearty breakfast, had retired to his study. Once there, he had settled himself in the armchair, and was being busy in the usual way at this time of year. The front doorbell clanged loudly, and the rat sent Billy, the smaller hedgehog, to see who it might be. Presently, Billy returned with the otter. "Thought I should find you here," said the otter. "They were all in a great state of alarm along the river bank when you didn't return home last night. But I knew that when people were in any fix, they went to Badger. My, it was fine coming through the snow as the red sun was rising. I was about halfway when I came across the rabbit sitting on a stump. He told me that Mole had been seen in the wild wood last night." "Weren't you at all, nervous?" asked the mole. "Nervous?" The otter showed a gleaming set of strong white teeth as he laughed. "Never. Here, Mole, fry me some slices of ham. I'm frightfully hungry." So the mole, having cut some slices of ham, set the hedgehogs to fry it, and returned to his own breakfast, while the otter and rat trotted about the river bank. A plate of fried ham had been cleared, and set back for more when the badger entered. He greeted them all. "It must be getting on for luncheon time," he remarked to the otter. "You must be hungry." "Indeed," replied the otter. The sight of these greedy young hedgehogs stuffing themselves makes me feel famished. The hedgehogs looked timidly up at Mr. Badger, but were too shy to say anything. Here, you two youngsters, be off home, said the Badger kindly. I'll send someone with you to show you the way. Presently, the others sat down to luncheon together. The Mole found himself placed next to Mr. Badger, so took the opportunity to tell Badger how comfortable and at home, homelike it felt to him. Once well underground, he said, you know exactly where you are. The Badger simply beamed on him. There's no security or peace except underground. The Mole agreed, and the Badger, in consequence, got very friendly with him. When lunch was over, he said, I'll take you around this little place of mine. After luncheon, the Badger lighted a lantern and bade the Mole follow him. Crossing the hall, they passed down one of the principal tunnels, and the wavering light of the lantern gave glimpses on the either side of rooms, both large and small. The Mole was staggered at the size. How on earth, Badger, he said at last, did you ever find time and strength to do all this? It's astonishing. Well, it would be astonishing, said the Badger simply, if I had done it. But as a matter of fact, I did none of it. You see, long ago on this spot, where the Wildwood stands now, there was a city of people. Here where we are standing, they lived. They were a powerful people and great builders. But what has become of them all? Asked the Mole. Who can tell? Said the Badger. People come, they stay for a while, and then they go. But we remain. There were badgers here long before that same city ever came to be, and now there are badgers here again. When they got back to the kitchen, they found the Rat walking up and down. The underground atmosphere was getting on his nerves. Come along, Mole, he said as soon as he caught sight of them. We must get off while it's daylight. It'll be all right, my fine fellow, said the Otter. I'm coming along with you, and if there's a head that needs to be punched, you can confidently rely upon me to punch it. You really needn't fret, Ratty, added the Badger. My passages run farther than you think. When you're ready to go, you shall lead by one of my shortcuts. Before long, the Badger led the way along a damp tunnel that wound and dipped for a weary distance. At last, daylight began to show itself through tangled growth near the mouth of the passage. The Badger, bidding them goodbye, pushed them hurriedly through the opening, hastily made good again the creepers and brushwood that surrounded it. Were your predictions correct about whether Mr. Badger shows hospitality to Rat and Mole? When does the theme of hospitality come up in today's read aloud? Give 2 or 3 examples as demonstrated through the characters. So feel free to write those down, or we would share some in class. Mr. Badger welcomes Rat and Mole into his home very late at night. He brings them dry, warm clothes. He bandages Mole's leg. He conducts Mole and Rat to sleep in his guest beds. He welcomes and feeds 2 hedgehogs that become lost in the snow, etc. Good. Those are all acceptable answers. From whose perspective is today's read aloud told? It's a good question for you. Mole's. Very good. So going back to Mole's perspective. Describe Mr. Badger's home. Here's one for you. It is warm, underground, cozy, hidden, welcoming, or oppressive, according to the Rat. According to Rat. Everyone else thought it was pretty warm compared to what's up on top, right? You learn through the dialogue that both Badger and Mole have underground homes. Why do you think they like living underground? Well, they won't be bothered by other people. It's secure. You don't need to worry about the weather. Possibly earthquakes, but I don't think they have any over there where they live. They won't break the way a house can, etc. Now, describe the atmosphere of Badger's underground tunnels. The way it feels. The way the surroundings are. They're dark, damp, airless, and oppressive. Those are all very good words of description. Now, in nature, would Mole feel at home or out of place in this environment? Why? So, in the natural world, that isn't fiction, would Mole feel at home in that world? He would feel at home, because moles in nature live underground as well. In the read aloud, you heard that Mr. Badger retired to his study and was busy in the usual way at this time of year. What do you think this means? Animals in nature, such as badgers, are less active in the winter because they hibernate. So Badger is joking that he will be busy sleeping. The animals and their hibernation and other habitat ways of living will be discussed in our Domain 2 unit on classification of animals. What are some things animals do to prepare for winter? They gather food and store it so that it will last for the winter. Lots of storage. In the read aloud, you heard Rat is thoroughly ready to leave Badger's house. Why do you think this is? Rat was definitely ready. He was thoroughly ready. He's more ready than anybody. He was afraid it'll get dark, and he doesn't want to spend another night in the wildwood. He doesn't like being underground, because he's a water rat, and it's somewhat against his nature. He would very much rather be near the river. All right, I'm going to ask a question. I'll give you a minute to think about the question, and then have you turn to your neighbors and discuss it. If you're doing this assignment separate from that, you can write down your answer in response. In The Wind and the Willows so far, you've heard about the riverbank and the wildwood. How would you compare and contrast them? Tell how they are similar and different. So remember, comparing is how things are similar, and contrasting is how things are different. Give you a moment to think about that. Okay, here's some word work for this lesson. The word summoned. In the read aloud, you heard, when they were thoroughly warm, Badger summoned them to the table to eat a delicious meal. To be summoned means to be called, beckoned, or sent for. In the Greek stories of mythology, the Greek god Zeus summons the Olympian gods and the goddesses of Mount Olympus through Hermes the messenger. Have you ever been summoned? By whom were you summoned? For what reason were you summoned? So you're going to either be called aloud for this or write an answer in response. Using the word summoned. So I was summoned when or summoned for. Use the word summoned in the sentence that you come up with. Brainstorm acting. Okay. You'll turn to your partner and brainstorm the kinds of words, phrases, or actions that show someone being summoned. You may wave your hand towards yourself, calling someone's name. Phrases like, come here, excuse me, or follow me this way. These are all ways. Practice these various gestures with your partner. Table partners. In your Domain 1 listening journal on page 5, write down examples of hospitality. Please read aloud. And here again, hospitality is treating guests well, being warm and welcoming and friendly toward them. So on your themes chart, you should have written this information. Information from today's read aloud about how Badger shows hospitality to his friends and to the hedgehogs. Very good. Now, animals in their habitats. We're going to learn more about animals and habitats again in the next unit, but mole and badger both prefer to live underground. Water rats and otters prefer to live above ground near water. So the reason for their characters giving this preference is their habitat. Their habitats or natural homes or environments an animal, plant, or organism live in. In nature, otters and water rats, or European water voles, make their homes above ground near water, whereas both mole and badgers make their homes underground by digging holes and tunnels. So that's part of animal behavior that we see in The Wind and the Willows that is realistic or true to life. So compare or contrast other examples of animal behavior in this story that is realistic or fantasy. Feel free to write those responses. And here is listening journal, page 5, where you'd write down your examples of the theme hospitality from today's read aloud. Very good. Have a pleasant evening, and I will see you in your next lesson.